You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this happened? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Today I'm going to be covering a video from Spirit Science. Spirit Science, for those of you who don't know, is basically a New Age YouTube channel that makes money by saying things that sound like they came from an AI-fed words like consciousness, energy, vibration, knowing, and Christ, and then told to just combine them randomly into grammatically correct sentences. Essentially, it's a bunch of nonsense, but some of it is dangerous. For example, the face of the channel, a man named Jordan, thinks that all the suffering you endure is your own fault and you just need a more positive outlook. Now, I'm not going to say that attitude doesn't do anything to make you feel better, but it's also dangerous to the mental health of people to tell them incorrectly that all of their problems are directly their fault for being in a bad mood or thinking unhappy thoughts. Sorry, but if you had a horrible injury or got laid off, chances are that your thoughts about the world had nothing to do with it, and pretending that they did will just make you feel worse. Of course, when Jordan was asked what this meant for, say, starving children in the undeveloped world, he said, oh, that's not their fault. Other people are misusing resources. Which of course means that, unlike you, they're not in control of their lives. So when it was pointed out to him that this idea meant that starving kids must be jerks, his solution was to say, no. They're just less spiritually powerful. As if that makes it all good. Before we go on about Jordan, though, I just want to remind everyone that if you end up liking this video, please actually hit the like button and comment. Also subscribe if you're new here and haven't already done so. All of these things really help the channel grow, and I'd like the channel to do that. Of course, the biggest thing that I have to talk about with Jordan is that he has done a particular thing that is like a grape, but the first letter isn't there. And it's not me saying it, it's Jordan who admitted to it on a recorded call with his victim. I'm not going to play the audio here, however, I will link to it. But here's a warning, though. It's not an easy thing to listen to, so Jordan might be the only person I've ever talked about who could give Kent Hovind a run for his money in the Scumbag Olympics. This is a longer preamble than normal, but that's because when discussing things that sound like grape, it's best not to put it at the beginning of the video in hopes of avoiding YouTube robots who like to steal my money. Anyway, this video is about how to raise the frequency of your consciousness, which, spoiler alert, doesn't mean anything, and ends up sounding way more like Scientology than I'm comfortable with. So here we go. Let's hear from Jordan.
What is your level of consciousness?
Well, I'm pretty sure that's a meaningless question, but since I haven't had the levels defined for me, I'm just going to say, I don't know.
This video is an intention to support you in understanding the spectrum of the levels of consciousness.
Then start by explaining them so I can actually answer the question when you ask it at the end of the video. This whole thing is backwards.
As well as where you fit on it, and give you a roadmap to elevate your consciousness to a higher frequency.
A higher frequency, huh? Weird then how the only thing on your little chart with frequency listed is the types of brain waves, and they're going down in frequency as you move up on the chart. You sure you don't mean down in frequency? Or is it just possibly the case that in addition to being a shit-stained sexual predator, you don't even know what the word frequency is, Jordan? Well, let's explain it. Frequency is simply the number of occurrences of a repeated event per unit time. Usually this is given as some number over a period of time. The number that is divided by time may or may not have units. So for example, 40 RPM is 40 revolutions per minute. The revolutions refers to the spinning around of something. And of course the minutes mean that every minute 40 such revolutions are made. Another common way to measure frequency is hertz. Hertz is an occurrence per second. And so if you're familiar with gaming, it's actually the same basic unit as the FPS, or frames per second. Hertz are usually used to measure the frequency of electromagnetic radiation, including light. So higher numbers of hertz mean higher frequency. So if consciousness has a frequency, then what is the thing it does repeatedly, and how do we measure it?
For those who are unfamiliar with this is a chart that has been gifted to humanity by Dr. David Hawkins.
Dr. David Hawkins was a sleep neurologist in the 1970s and 1980s. Since the 1990s, though, he has basically stopped publishing in science journals and been publishing spiritualist stuff about New Age type ill-defined things like the frequency of consciousness and giving Scientology-style scales of emotions. Look, it's fine to transition out of being a scientist and into some other thing, even if I think the thing you're doing is silly. But to pretend that what a former scientist says about things he can't publish in scientific journals because he has no scientific evidence is on the same level as actual science because, well, he was a scientist is just a dishonest appeal to authority. When it comes to this stuff, there is no particular reason to take Dr. David Hawkins seriously beyond confirmation bias.
He is an absolutely outstanding scientist.
Decades ago, he was a reasonably well-respected scientist, but he hasn't really done science in about 40 years, near as I can tell.
Scholar.
Maybe, that's hard to determine just from his publication history.
And way shower.
Near as I can tell, that's a title that doesn't mean anything. So sure, whatever, he's a way shower. And so am I.
For humanity to move into a higher, resonant understanding.
Resonance refers to the increase in amplitude of a wave when an external periodic force is applied that is close to or exactly that of the natural frequency in which the system under examination operates. This is something many people encounter with a tuning fork. If struck, a tuning fork, because of its material properties and size, will naturally vibrate at a particular frequency. But if you have two such forks that have the same natural frequency, and you strike one near the other, they will both start vibrating. This is resonance. So for understanding to have resonance, it would first have to have a typical frequency. So, Jordan, do tell, what is this thing that happens periodically that constitutes the numerator in the frequency of understanding? How do we measure it? What units of time do we typically divide it by? I haven't even watched this, and I'm giving you a spoiler right now. He won't give it to us. Because in addition to being a sexual predator, of the kind that rhymes with rapist, he's also a con man who sells pseudo-spiritual nonsense to the gullible.
Of who and what we are, and our place in the cosmos.
I don't really have a response to that per se. I just wanted to let the audience know that I have removed some music from the video, so the audio is a bit weird here and there. I don't know what the music was, and I wasn't about to risk a copyright claim for this monster.
Understanding this chart is understanding that there are many levels of consciousness.
Okay, cool, so let's look at this chart. First, we have on the left some generally interchangeable emotions with no particular organization, except that the ones people usually think of as bad are towards the bottom, and the ones they think of as good are at the top. But there's also some things that are less emotions and more character traits like courage, neutrality, reason, and enlightenment. Not sure how those got mixed in there. Then each one is associated with a color that basically goes from low frequency to high frequency, but then for some reason it shifts to violet, which is what happens when you get both high and low frequency light hitting your retina at the same time. Looks like someone thought the pride flag actually represented how real rainbows work. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And if you're going to tell us that you have something amazing to tell us about frequency, and you don't even know how color and frequency work, well, I'm going to have to assume you don't know what you're talking about. Directly to the right of that, we have what appears to be arbitrary numbers, no idea why or what units they have, how it was determined, or anything else about them. Next we have a cone with no apparent reason for why it has this shape, but the colors match the ones found indicating each emotion or character trait. On it we have what seem like, themes maybe for the emotions and character traits. I'm not sure what any of them above suffering survival are supposed to mean, although I don't think that survival and suffering always go together. I feel like plenty of people are having a great time and are also surviving. Next we have a list of brainwaves that, despite being associated with colors in ascending frequency, are listed in descending frequency. That seems like a flat contradiction to the rest of this. Surely if this is all about raising frequency, then the ordering for the colors, the arbitrary levels, and the brainwave frequency should all be in the same order, right?
Going from approximately 0, although David starts the chart at 20.
So not approximately 0, but also 20 what? Consciousness vibes? What are these numbers? They're just meaningless unless they have some kind of unit or way to assess or measure them. You might as well assign a random number to all the crap in your house and then decide that the stuff that you gave higher numbers is the best stuff you own. And why is that? Oh, well, because you gave it high numbers.
Up to 1,000.
Why not 80 bajillion? It's not like we're measuring anything here, right? And you know what indicates that we're not measuring anything? It's that with the brainwaves, we were given a unit. Hertz. So clearly Dr. Hawkins knows what units are. He could have included them on the left too. He chose not to. Probably because he has no units.
Now we will talk about what is beyond 1,000 at a later time.
I probably won't be around for that unless I actually hear that there's something to this.
But for right now, we can understand that at the bottom, there we go, we see shame.
See, the thing is, shame isn't always a bad thing. There's a reason that saying that someone has no shame is not considered a nice thing to say about that person. If you've done something wrong, you should feel shame about it. Shame is supposed to motivate us to do the right thing. Same with guilt. Now, they can be inappropriate, such as when someone feels shame for something that isn't wrong, but simply arbitrarily frowned upon. But that's not a problem with shame, it's a problem with other people who are doing the shaming. But if you say, forced yourself on a woman without her consent and then admitted it in a recorded call, Jordan, then you should feel guilt and shame.
At our base frequency, the lowest energy
Base frequency doesn't mean anything, and frequency is not necessarily tied to energy. Waves have three main parameters: frequency, which is how often a peak passes a particular point in space; wavelength, which is how far distant each peak is from its neighbors; and amplitude, which is just how tall the wave is. Now, in light waves, these are interrelated, but that's not just generally true of all waves. Of these, only amplitude corresponds to the amount of energy in a wave, and Jordan, you have just said that that is frequency. And, of course, this is not the only time that Jordan is going to mix up amplitude and frequency, because he doesn't know what a wave is.
Presumably above death itself.
So shame is above death. I feel like fear or grief would be the more common thing before death than shame. See, that's the thing. None of these are actually in some objective hierarchy. It's like Yoda saying, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Except you can rearrange that in any order. Can suffering lead to fear, which leads to hate? Well, yes. Why is apathy worse than grief? Why is shame lower than guilt? And like I said about shame, sometimes feeling guilty is a good thing. There are times when people should feel guilty, Jordan.
Or absolute despair.
Funny thing is, of all the things on here, I'd say absolute despair is the only one I can say could reasonably be said to belong at the bottom of the list. But it's not even on the list. Also, that creepy laugh is only made creepier coming from you, Jordan.
So shame is at the lowest level of consciousness, at 20. And between there and 1,000, 700 plus is generally considered enlightenment all the way up to 1,000.
Why does it go only to 1,000? What's the scale? Is it linear or logarithmic? I'm willing to bet we won't get an answer. We won't even find out how to tell if you've gone up or down on the objective consciousness frequency unit.
Well, it's not drawn on this chart. The idea is that it goes to there. I'm writing this with my mouse. I suppose I could just use the pen, and then it would be a lot cleaner.
I'll give Jordan this. Tablets are pretty handy, and he is a legitimately good cartoonist. Too bad he has to use those talents to bamboozle people at best, and at worst, well, you know.
Well, my handwriting was never the cleanest, but nevertheless, this is the spectrum that goes between shame and enlightenment, with 200 being the threshold of transformation.
Transformation of what into what, Jordan? Is pride bad and courage good and neutrality better than pride? Like, why? Courage can be too extreme and lead to foolhardiness. Neutrality can mean fairness, but it can also mean staying silent in the face of injustice and oppression. Pride can mean hubris, but it can also mean a justifiable satisfaction with one's own accomplishments. How are these a scale? This is just a random assortment.
Now, in order to explain this, I will shift over for a moment to these charts.
Jordan, you say you're going to explain it, but I've seen a fair bit of your content, and I don't think you've ever actually explained, well, anything. But hey, prove me wrong.
There is a dividing line at 200 in the levels of consciousness. Ooh.
Well, let's take a quick look at these charts then. And yes, there is a dividing line according to the chart on the right. Okay, we have the same mix of nonsense on the far left with the same numbering, except going to 1,000. To the right of that, next we have the emotional state associated with the level. So why not name the levels after the emotional states? At least then there'd be a consistent theme. I guess because then you couldn't call the top one enlightenment? Okay, so shame is associated with humiliation. Yeah, that makes sense. Guilt with blame. Well, that's just reversed. Guilt is the emotion and blame is the action that causes it in others. Apathy with despair, but apathy is not caring. Despairing is caring, but thinking that nothing can possibly turn out all right. Grief with regret, I'll give that a pass. Fear with anxiety, fair enough. Desire with craving, well, I'm not sure I'd call either an emotion, although I feel like you're going to want things on the so-called higher levels too. Anger with hate, well, now we're just back to Yoda associating things that feel bad together with no particular rhyme or reason. Pride is associated with scorn, which can sometimes be the case, but you can also just be justifiably proud of your accomplishments without scorning others. Courage with affirmation, but affirmation isn't an emotion. It's being told you're doing what you should be, or you are how you should be, and it doesn't really have anything to do with facing danger or anything like that. Neutrality with trust, except that you can be neutral and very trusting, but also neutral and very untrusting. The key is that you not pick and choose whom to trust and whom to distrust. Willingness is associated with optimism, and let me tell you from experience that those do not need to go together. I'm frequently willing to do things while being quite pessimistic about those things. That basically describes my entire time in the military. Acceptance goes with forgiveness, which, like, sure, seems reasonable. Reason goes with understanding, and yeah, again, that seems fair. Love goes with reverence, which is odd. I can see an argument that if you revere something, you probably love it, but you can also love something without revering it. Like, most people with pet dogs love their dogs, but I wouldn't say that most of them revere their pets. Joy goes with serenity, but I feel like you can be joyful without being serene, which implies being at rest. You can be quite active and joyful. Peace goes with bliss, and yeah, it feels like you should have swapped bliss and serenity, because just being at peace doesn't mean that you're as happy as you could be. It just means that you're not currently in any conflicts. Enlightenment goes with ineffable, which isn't an emotion, it's more like being incomprehensible, but seen as a good thing. Okay, let's look at the chart on the right now. So we have force and power, and while I know the difference between those in the context of physics, in the context of consciousness, I have no idea what that distinction is supposed to be. We have fear, grief, apathy, guilt, and shame listed under inaction, but other than apathy, all of those can motivate great action, especially fear. Desire, anger, and pride come under hyperactivity, which I feel like could possibly cover a larger portion of the so-called scale, but also doesn't necessarily have to proceed from any of these things. Acceptance, willingness, neutrality, and courage come under happiness and productivity. Not sure how that lines up with neutrality, which I feel like more often leads to passivity. Reason is associated with peak performance without stress, which, if it's the peak, wouldn't that make it the highest and best level, since if you leave the peak, you obviously can only go downhill, as that's what a peak is. Love, joy, peace, and enlightenment are all associated with, quote, synchronicity and extraordinary outcomes, end quote. So that's just New Age for miracles. I don't know, I felt at least peace, love, and joy, and I don't feel like it gave me miraculous powers, so I'm gonna lean pretty hard on that X button.
It is a level where everything below it moves in the direction of force.
As in, like, mass times acceleration, so like kilogram meters squared, aka the Newton? That's how you measure force. Which way is this force acting? What's it acting on? What's the magnitude of this force?
As in, it's a downward, negative forcing of things to happen.
So, like gravity, or forcing things to happen, you mean that you're taking action against people against their will? This almost lines up with some of the emotions and whatnot on the list, although if I feel shame or guilt or apathy, that's not very likely to make me want to force anyone to do anything.
It is the level of vibration of shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, and pride.
So vibration is something going back and forth. So what's going back and forth? What's the amplitude, frequency, and wavelength of this vibration? You can't just call something a vibration and be done with it. Sound is a vibration in some physical medium, and you can define it mathematically. Guilt is not a vibration, nor do we have any reason to think it is associated with one.
And pride in the sense of the 7 deadly sins version of pride.
It's a bit weird going for a bit of Catholic doctrine when you're usually not very big on institutional or traditional Christianity, but okay. At least we have a clarification that it's specifically the kind of pride that leads you to think less of others and to exaggerate your own importance.
As we have a few understandings of pride in the world today. Everything above 200 on the consciousness chart,
which again is a number that I've not seen any justification for. 200 watts.
Is a source of power.
Well, I assume here you mean personal power as in the ability to accomplish goals in the world, as opposed to the physics quantity of some amount of energy over some unit of time.
It is a movement into a higher consciousness and naturally is an elevating force, the force, if you will, the source field, the God source consciousness spirit that is alive within all of us.
Yes, very good, sir. What kind of dressing would you like with your word salad today? Perhaps a raspberry vinaigrette?
And when we move ourselves from a state of force, as in forcing things to happen and be the way that we want them to divine power,
then according to your slide, we go from force to the force with a capital F. Not confusing at all. Also, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that just being happy doesn't give you divine power, at least not that I've seen.
Then we ourselves move through stages of courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, and enlightenment.
Yeah, that's been your claim the whole time, but are you going to explain what any of that means? No, of course not.
Once we reach 1,000, we reach into the realms of sainthood.
What does sainthood even mean without the ecclesial body to define and recognize it? Also, what is this, fanfic? The chart doesn't have a post-1K sainthood section. Plus, if we're looking at a non-Christian analog for sainthood, the closest thing I can think of is bodhisattvas, who are beings that could reach nirvana but opt to stay in this world to help others escape samsara, but they have already reached enlightenment. So really, why not just have 700 as sainthood? Plus, if we're going with a Christian context, then peacefulness and bliss are often associated with saints who practice various forms of mysticism. So why not have sainthood at 600?
And everything beyond that moves into the space of ascension and ascended mastery.
Okay, so I'm going to be fair here. You have other videos about that, Jordan, and while I suspect that you don't explain any of that stuff in them, I'm also not going to complain about them not being explained here. It's fair enough to not want to repeat everything in every video.
It is our destiny as humans to move fully beyond the level 1,000, collectively. And we are learning how. And it is a process.
What's the evidence that we are moving beyond level 1000? Near as I can tell, humans are largely the same as they were millennia ago. Sure, their cultures have changed, and while this might be presentism, I think human cultures, by and large, have improved ethically. I don't see any huge difference in the likelihood of any random person feeling anger, love, apathy, or shame. If humans are really progressing towards becoming star babies or whatever, shouldn't there be a whole lot less, say, shame, guilt, and apathy than there were in, say, 2000 BCE? I don't see any real evidence that this is true, though.
If we were to take a moment and check the average level of consciousness for the world,
Using a consciometer, no doubt.
we might find that it hovers somewhere in between 75 and 350.
So between grief and acceptance, that's a range that's basically most of the chart. I guess people who are reasonable are apathetic or weird outliers.
And we will check this in a moment, but first we must know how to check.
Yes, that would be good, Jordan. Let's find out how to take our consciousness reading. Hopefully it doesn't require anal insertion of the consciometer.
So the best way, the easiest way, the funnest way to check a level of consciousness for anything is through muscle testing. You might be familiar with muscle testing, that traditional thing where you put your arm out and someone pushes down on the arm, and if you have a strong thought, the arm will resist. And if you have a weak thought, then the arm will give away.
Oh, you mean that thing that's basically just best explained by your subconscious? Or just, a scam on the part of the person doing it? Sure.
Now, this is something that each of us can do with ourselves, with our own bodies. And the way that I learned was to take these fingers and wrap them around each other. You can use any fingers that you want to, but I like using the middle finger and the thumbs.
For the audience, since you can't see it, he's putting his middle finger and thumb on each hand together such that they form two interlocking rings.
And I'll make a link, and I'll ask a question, and I'll get an answer. And one of the easiest ways to start is to simply say, show me yes, and then try and tug your fingers apart. And you'll find that your fingers stay together.
Oddly enough, when I tried this before knowing what yes was supposed to do, they separated. It's almost like this whole thing is more of a way to check what you want than it is a way to measure your consciousness frequency levels. And the thing is, it's not a useless thing to do. When I have a tough decision between two things, I often simply flip a coin. And it's not so much that I follow the result of the coin flip, but I see how I feel about the result. If the result upsets me, then I know I want to go with the other option. If I'm satisfied with the result, then that was probably the better option for me all along. If pulling your fingers apart works for you in this, then great, go for it. But that's all you're doing. You're subconsciously checking on what you really want. Doing that isn't going to show you how close you are to enlightenment.
And then you say, show me no. They'll break apart. Show me positive. Show me healthy. Show me good. Show me weakness. The fingers will break.
See, again, I got the opposite because I didn't start from the standpoint of this exercise will work in this specific way. Muscle testing like this isn't an objective test of anything. It works to reveal your subjective feelings if and only if you think it will. It's basically a psychological placebo.
This is a natural practice anybody can do.
Anyone with two hands that aren't paralyzed, which, isn't everyone.
And if you have the problem of overthinking it and wondering, am I just subconsciously telling myself to hold my fingers still?
The answer is yes. Yes, you are.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about the parsimonious and entirely expected result of human psychology. We're trying to measure the vibratory levels of your chakras. That's far more important than silly things like the way your mind works, as science indicates.
And the reason why is because everything that is strong in your field is a movement of upward power.
Technically, that's a sentence, but I don't think it means anything. And further, what if, say, a serial killer takes the test? Someone who actually enjoys the most heinous acts. I can guarantee you that if they believe in this test, they'll get the results that their awful behavior is A-okay and totally leading them to enlightenment. So, Jordan, if murder is strong in someone's field, is that a movement towards enlightenment? Please tell us.
So if you get a strong reaction, that is an upward motion.
Okay, let's just accept that, even though it's completely nonsensical. That sounds like we're measuring whether something will move us up or down on this chart. That's not a way to measure where you are on the chart, though. Here's an analogy. Infrared light transfers energy to things based on their level of absorption of light at that wavelength and the intensity of the light. So if I have a rock with a known IR absorption and an IR laser of a known intensity, and I have the specific heat capacity of the rock, I can calculate how much hotter it will get if I shine the laser on it for a given amount of time. But does that tell me how warm the rock is right now? No, of course not. Where are you now is not the same question as which way are you going and how fast you're going that way.
And if you get a weak reaction, it breaks. That is a negative motion.
Same response, I just don't want to repeat it.
And you can check basically anything. You can answer any question. And the reason for this is because the physical dimension, the physical reality, is a result and reflection of every other invisible force and point of consciousness and light and truth and darkness in all of creation.
First, citation needed. Second, if it can answer any question, then what's the deal with this? I asked the universe or whatever how many clams are currently alive and my fingers didn't separate. What does that mean, Jordan? How many does my fingers staying linked mean?
What this means is that your thoughts and your feelings are the true source of your actions.
I mean, yeah, as a rule, a person's action proceeds from their thoughts, because both are products of the brain. There are exceptions, like some reflexes that only go to the spine, like pulling away from a burning hot object, but like I said, those are exceptions.
And the world that you have manifested around you, your life, your lifestyle, the way that you think and you believe about the world, all of that is a result of the invisible forces of thought, feeling, and the invisible movements of spirit.
So the world around me is the result of, first, my own thoughts, which thoughts resulted in, say, the war in the Ukraine. And if it wasn't my thoughts, other than Putin, whose thoughts were it? That guy who just died on the front after his home was destroyed and whose wife and child are now refugees, did his thoughts manifest an invasion? Is everyone in Ukraine just a jerk with bad thoughts and they deserve to be invaded? What about the Russian soldiers? Which thoughts of theirs manifested their role in an obviously egregious attempted land grab as part of an imperialist push by the oligarchs who run their country? See, the whole "your thoughts create the world around you" sounds cool as an upper middle class American with no particular existential or even financial threats. Step down just a bit on the ladder of security and affluence, though, and suddenly you realize what a horrible idea that is. All of the worst off people must just be bad people, because they're the ones who manifested such horrible things.
As a result of that, you really don't have to think so hard when it comes to muscle testing. You can say very simply, is this healthy for me? Yes. Is this good for me? Does this move me to a higher consciousness? And if you get a strong connection, you got it.
Remember that you promised to tell us how to measure our consciousness levels, Jordan? Are you going to do that, or are you going to keep purporting to tell us how to tell which direction something will take us in?
And if it breaks, then you go, is there a better answer? Yes. You would say, what is it? But your mind can come up with a yes or no answer, or a yes or no question that you can ask that will allow for a truth to be made known, because as above, so below, the body will reveal the truth.
It'll reveal what you were already thinking, but there's no guarantee you're actually right about it.
In the most authentic way. And then you will be called to trust. Because if God says, or Spirit says, your body says, through the answering of this question, that the best thing for you is to do something that you don't normally do. Maybe you have a call to talk to a random stranger, and you check, and it's like, is this wise? Is this the best thing? Yes. That's scary for me. Take a leap of faith. Go and say hello.
And then when it doesn't work out, just forget about it. Only selectively pay attention to the times that it works out well for you. It's the same thing that cold reading psychics do. People tend to ignore the misses and remember the hits. If you follow this advice and sometimes step outside your comfort zone, then sure, sometimes it'll work out. And maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes people need to have their comfort zones expanded. But when it doesn't, that'll just be ignored and you'll get an inflated sense of how reliable this technique is.
And the reason that it works this way is you'll see that courage is at 200. Right here. Right here. It takes courage for us to be able to follow in the will of Spirit, to follow in that which is divine and good for us and healthy, because it means breaking out of our boundaries and our limitations and our scarcities and our fears and our anger and our guilt and our shame and our suffering.
But wouldn't it take courage to do something that goes against all that stuff, but that is dangerous? To go back to the previous example, I would argue that both Ukrainians and Russians tend to show courage, but it seems unlikely that both sides of the war are in line with the spirit or whatever.
Because many people are down here. And it's time for us, we're called to move to a higher frequency.
Except remember, the only frequency we've actually been given goes down as you move up on the chart. So far, no explanation for that.
Now. And so, you can test anything, and you can ask, what is the level of consciousness of blank?
Except no, you can't, Jordan. Even according to you, all you can do is say, hey, is this going up or down? But with that near complete failure to understand the most basic things about how measurement works, we're going to leave off with Jordan. If you like this video, do remember to hit like. If you don't like it, hit dislike and tell me what you didn't like in the comments. Either way, be sure to share the video on social media and subscribe to the channel. If you're subscribed, use the bell icon to turn on all notifications so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Work in Progress, Benthoven, Cynically Skeptic, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landon Knoll, Yapetus, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if the annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.
How